Welcome back, gang. I want to start pulling in some of the packages that we need to set this up. So the first thing we need to do is install a new Laravel project. Now, in order to get this to work correctly, what you need to do is create one main folder, and in that folder we're going to have two separate packages. One will be for the back end, one will be for the front end. So let's start with the back end. We're going to create a new Laravel project and we're going to call it API, and we're going to let that run. Now that that's finished, we can go ahead and we don't need to CD into the project, we can just head right into our text editor from here. So the one I'll be using is VS Code. Okay, and there it is, and now you can see that we have our new project in here. We'll open that up, and here are all of our folders. Okay, so now we can come back in here and exit out of this because we don't need it anymore. Then I want to open up a terminal, and we'll just let that sit there for now. The first thing that I want to do is connect to our database. So I already have one set up in here, and it's called Friendzy demo. Username is root, password is root. And in this terminal down here, now we can CD here into the API. And then we're going to run PHP artisan migrate to make sure that that's connected correctly. Okay, now that that's done, let's just go ahead and check the database and make sure that you have that in there. So Friendzy demo. Cool, there's our database. Okay, fantastic. The next thing I want to do is head over into Laravel Fortify and start pulling in the authentication package that we're going to be using. So we'll go down to installation, and then composer require Laravel Fortify right here. We'll copy that, and we'll go ahead and paste it in our terminal. Okay, now that that's done, I'm gonna close this out. Well, I'll leave it open for now, but we'll stretch this out so that we can see what's actually happening. So let's head back into Fortify and keep going. So the next thing we need to do is publish the vendor files. Okay, so we'll grab this code here, copy, paste it in our terminal, enter. Okay, so that's brought in all the extra files that we need for Fortify. So let's head back to the documentation and see what else there is to do. So this will publish, cool. Next you should migrate your database, so we need to do that again. The next thing we need to do is vendor publish command discussed above will also publish the providers. You should ensure this class is registered with the config app. So let's just grab this, copy, and then migration's done. Great. So now we need to go to let's bring this down, and we'll go to the config app. Okay, we'll scroll down to the provider section. It should be down here somewhere. Yep, application service providers. We can just drop it right under here. Okay, can close this. And then now we can add class, and that's done. So let's see what's next. Fortify features. Fortify feature configuration file contains a features configuration. So we need to make sure that this stuff is uncommented in that config file, which should be right here. Okay, go down, go down, go down. I think it's this stuff down below here. Yep, so we're not going to be setting reset passwords or anything. The only thing we really need from in here is the registration. Now let's head back to the documentation and see what else is next. Disabling views, we want to change that to false. So head back to the terminal, the text editor, and views, which is right up here. We'll change that to false because we're disabling all of the views that come with Fortify. It automatically sets them for us and creates them for us, but we're not using Laravel as a front end, so we don't need that. We're going to be doing all that in Nuxt. Okay, so let's head back to the documentation. Disabling views and reset password. We're not dealing with any of that. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. If we run into an error, then we'll come back to this. So now let's head over into Laravel Sanctum and start pulling that in. Now, in the past, Sanctum has been a little bit tricky to handle front-end frameworks attached to Laravel. It's been a little tricky, but we're going to make it as easy as possible. So let's go down to the installation, and then we'll copy this code here. This is what we need to install it. Go back to the terminal. We'll open this up. Paste it in. Enter. Okay, so now that that's installed, let's head back to the documentation, and next we should publish the configuration files. So copy, paste, enter. Okay, head back to the documentation and see what's next. Finally, you should run your database migrations. Now this is going to be the table that has our tokens. We don't really need to run it, but in case you do want to switch this up to tokens, it doesn't really hurt to have it. We're going to be using cookies, but it doesn't really hurt to have. Okay, so we'll head back to the documentation. Now it says next, if you plan to utilize Sanctum to authenticate an SPA, you should add your Sanctum's middleware. Okay, now Sanctum has two different ways of handling authentication. You can either do tokens or you can use cookies. And that's what we're going to be using, cookies. API token is more of if we were putting it into the same project. So if we were putting Nuxt within the Laravel project, then we can use the tokens, but we're not. So we're just going to go ahead and use this one. Okay, so let's head back down to the authentication. Okay, and we need to put this in our kernel file, this line right here. So copy, and you want to make sure that it's the kernel file that's in the app. HTTP kernel. Okay, and then we'll come down to the API in the middleware groups, and we'll paste that little bit of code right in. And don't forget to import it as well. Fantastic. Let's see what's next. Cores and cookies. So if you are having trouble authenticating, then you should make sure that your course configuration is returning the access control allow credentials, and then you want to turn them to true. So let's go into the cores config, which is right down here. Open that up. We can close this Fortify up. Okay, so this is what's going to handle our cores, our cross-site it basically allowing the API to talk to an outside application. So this supports credentials. We want to change this to true. And then up here is a list of the different paths that it will allow. And this is, we'll be giving permissions to different things up here in order to have them be able to reach back to Sanctum. So let's head back to the documentation and see what else is next. This Axios defaults with credentials needs to be set to true, but we're going to handle that with the Nuxt. When we set it up, it'll automatically do it when we add the Laravel Sanctum package to it. Okay, finally, you should ensure your domains application session cookie. We'll do that in a second. And then this we can do in a bit as well. Logging in, blah, 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 protecting routes. We need to change the Sanctum, the route, because we're going to hold all of our routes in the routes API file. Okay, so this, we can just go ahead and do it now. Change it to Sanctum. Okay, let's check back. Authorizing private broadcast, we're not doing mobile. We're not doing tokens. Okay, I think that's it. We need to change some things in the environment variables. Now, the first thing we need to change is our app URL. Our app URL, our backend and our frontend need to be on the same domain. So for the app URL, we're going to change to localhost dot colon 8000. Okay. Now, the other thing we need to change is if we go to the where is it? Sanctum, our config, Sanctum. Okay, this is our stateful domain. Okay, which is localhost 3000. This is what we need to be able to contact our front end, which will be Nuxt. Nuxt will be on localhost 3000. Okay, so let's copy that and we'll set that environment variable in here. Okay, we'll just put it right under the session lifetime. Okay, and then we need to make that equal to localhost 3000. The other thing we need to do is also add our session domain, and we are getting that from our config folder, our session file. Okay, if you go all the way down here to it should be down below. Okay, our session domain, you see that it's by default it's set to null. Okay, but this we need to actually set it in our env file. So we're going to come back here, we're going to set it here, and this one is going to be called just localhost. So now the API is now recognizing, it'll be able to recognize Nuxt endpoint and our endpoint, and it'll be able to talk to each other. And because localhost is the domain, that's what's holding the session for the entire application altogether. Okay, so to find that, you would go to the Laravel documentation, and if you come up here all the way to configuring your first party domains, everything that we just did is right in here. So if you need to go back and take a look and freshen up or just get some more information, that's where it would be. Okay, so now let's head back into the text editor, and I want to get ready to start pulling in Nuxt. So we're going to open up another terminal. We'll bring this, we can close all of these up for now. Okay, and straighten that up, and then we'll pull this up. Okay, so in this same generic folder we have. If you can see, we're logged in on the left side as we're CD'd into API, but in this one we're just CD'd into the overall Friendzy demo, which is this one right here. Okay, so we're going to go back to the documentation. We're going to go over to the installation page. I'll make sure to post all of these links, with the exception of Laravel, because I think you can find the documentation just fine, but I'll go ahead and post up the Nuxt and the Laravel Sanctum ones, in case you wanted to know which ones they were. So the one we're going to be using is using Create Nuxt app. Now, Nuxt is a really fun package. It's built right on top of Vue.js, and it just everything good about Vue.js, Nuxt just completely adds to it and makes it even that much better, for a lot of different reasons. SEO, and just the ease of the functionality, the ease of the way you can do things. Nuxt is just a really cool thing to look into. If you've never tried it before, we're going to do it here, but if you've never tried it before, I would definitely look into getting it and using it for other projects. So let's go down to, now the documentation has changed up a little bit, so it's kind of tricky to find, but if you go down a little bit, you'll see to get started quickly, you can use the Create Nuxt app. Okay, if you click that, it'll open up a brand new GitHub page. Okay, so this is the Nuxt Create Nuxt app page on GitHub. So if you go down to the actual documentation for it, you can pull it in through different ways. You can either use npx, npm, or yarn. If you already have Node and npm installed, then you can use either one of these. It doesn't really matter. But let's go ahead and just use, if you're using npm, just go ahead and use this one. So we'll copy, we'll come back to the text editor, and in the one on the right, we're going to paste that in. And this project, we're just going to call it client. And it's going to run for a little bit. It's going to take a little while, and then it'll bring up a list of different commands for us to enter in. So I'm going to pause the video and let it start working. And once it gets to that point, then I'll restart the video. Okay, great. Now that that's done, let's start customizing this setup. So our project name, we're just going to keep it client. We're going to be using JavaScript, and you use your up, down arrow keys to make changes. So the package manager we're going to be using is npm. The UI framework, we are going to be using Tailwind again. At some point I'm going to do use some of these others for different projects, but for now we'll just use Tailwind. Okay, we're going to pick Axios, and I think we can leave it there. We can leave these blank. Testing framework, we can leave it to none for now. Universal, server, we'll use server. And then development tools, we'll just use JSON config. You want to press the spacebar to select it. Okay, development tools. What is your GitHub user? I'm just going to put, well, I guess it doesn't really matter. Version control, no, we're not going to use any, because I am going to be pushing up this code to GitHub, but I want both of the folders to be in it. So I'm going to do it separately than using this one here. So we'll let that install. I'll pause the video and then I'll come back when it's done. Fantastic. Now that that's done, I have already gone ahead and run PHP artisan serve on the left side, just so that we could have the API running in the background. Okay, this whole Nuxt setup on the right side has created this client folder right here. Okay, so now what we have to do is cd into that folder, and then we have to run npm run dev. Okay, so here we have npm run dev. We'll let that run, and now we can actually click this link right here. So I'll click and it'll open up the new app that we just set up. I'm going to slide this over to the left so that we can stay a bit organized. Okay, so there it is. Fantastic. So now let's head back into the text editor and we'll drop this down. We'll keep this running. Okay, we first want to go to the nuxt.config.js. Okay, and there's a few things that we need to fix in here, but as you can see, it has everything that holds our package together. This is basically like the env file for Laravel. Okay, so it holds our CSS, our plugins, our modules. You see we have Tailwind pulled in here, we have Axios pulled in, and then we just now need to configure it. Okay, so one thing that we do need to bring in, and actually I'm going to stop this Nuxt for just real quick. That's if it stops. Yeah, it will. We'll hop back into the browser. Okay, now we've already done create Nuxt. We also need to bring in the Laravel Sanctum package so that we can start setting this up. Okay, so what we want to do is head over to the setup guide. Okay, and then we need to install it. So since we're using npm, we have already installed Axios, that's done, but we do need to install this Auth next package. Okay, so copy. And now we're back into our client folder. We'll paste that in there and let that run. Okay, what that's going to do is bring in all of our authentication for the Laravel Sanctum package. Okay, so we need to bring in this module. Since we already have it here, the Axios we already have, we can just put this right underneath. And then let's see if there's anything else. When adding, we're not using TypeScript. No, that's it. So we can go back to the Laravel Sanctum. And this is the strategy that we need to pull in. Okay, as you can see, there are other ones here where they give more details on how to do them. And this is how you would log in on the actual registration page or the login page. Okay, so let's grab this and go back to our text editor, and right under, we'll do it under Axios. We'll paste that in. One more thing that I want to do is fix this spacing. In the editor config folder file, I just want to change this to 4. Nothing against 2, but it's better for me to have it in 4. It's just a personal preference. Okay, so we'll go back to the Nuxt config. Okay, so we already have, as a strategy, Laravel Sanctum. We have our provider. Our URL needs to be the URL of our app. So it's HTTP localhost 8000. Need a comma under here so it stops screaming at me. And then we also need to add in some endpoints. So our endpoints are going to be, we need one for login, logout, and user. Okay, so login, and that URL is going to be login. We haven't set up these routes yet, but we'll do that in a second. So login. Okay, we're also going to need a logout, and that URL will end up being /logout. And one more, we need user, and that endpoint will end up being URL API user. And that's because if we go to the API folder and head down to our routes, okay, in our API route, that's what this is. Everything that goes through this route folder, this route file, this API file, it's prefixed automatically with API, which is why here we're going to be using API for this. We don't need these for here because we're actually going to be using the Fortify routes, which aren't API. We won't need to make routes for them. Okay, they're already made in when we installed the Fortify package. Those were already made. Now that's good for right now, but there's one more thing we need to do, and that's to set up the Axios module. Okay, so we'll open this up. If you take a look at the documentation for the Nuxt Auth, you'll see that we need to set the credentials, and that's what it said in our Sanctum, that we need to make sure that we set those credentials to true. I think they were up here. Yeah, the Axios defaults with credentials. So the way that we would do that with Nuxt is we would first add the base URL, and then we'll put HTTP localhost 8000, and this will basically just let the API know that every time we make an Axios request that we need to use the localhost 8000 because that's our API. That's the address of our API. Okay, so comma, and then credentials true. Okay, now let's go ahead and run npm run dev. Make sure that compiles down, and then we want to make sure also, more importantly, that we didn't break anything. Okay, now that that's done, let's go and make sure that it's working okay in our browser. And it is. Very cool. One cool function about Nuxt also is that it automatically reloads every time, it hot reloads every time you make a change into any one of the files. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it there for today. In the next episode, we are gonna start building out the pages, or at least getting us ready for the authentication so that we can set up the registration, the logout, the login, and get that entirely set up and connected to the backend because we haven't created any routes yet. So we're going to do that in the next episode, and then we'll be able to push forward and go ahead and get ready to tackle our friendship system. Okay, all of this code is going to be pushed up to GitHub, but I forgot to set up the repo before I started the tutorial today. So what I'm going to do is make sure that everything that we've done today is going to be added in the initial commit. So when you're looking, just know that that's the case. Everything is under that commit, that very first initial commit. Everything we've done today is going to be up there. Okay, so if you have any questions, drop them down below. I'll try to get back to you as quickly as I can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.